Although dramatized, the following is a true story. Alcatraz is a beautiful national park, but it used to be a prison back in the day. So let's go back in time. Alcatraz was a prison for some of the most dangerous prisoners in the country beyond imagination, from August 11th, 1934 to March 21st, 1963. Alcatraz held very famous people such as Machine Gun Kelly, an American gangster from Memphis, Tennessee, known for his famous gun, a Tommy gun, and has served 17 years from 1934 to 1951 for armed robbery, bootlegging, and kidnapping. Al Capone, also an American gangster and businessman ruling an empire of crime in Windy City, involving gambling, prostitution, murder, bootlegging, and more. He served several years from 1934 to 1939. In the end, the cost of running Alcatraz was too high, so it closed in 1963, and the prison became mostly abandoned. Throughout the history of relations between Native Americans and the U.S. government, treaties between the two have been disregarded. In the 1950s, the Eisenhower administration enacted the Relocation and Termination programs. According to the Global Nonviolent Action Database, this meant that any treaties that the U.S. government had previously signed with Native Americans would be terminated because they no longer existed as a sovereign nation. The government followed this by moving Native Americans off their land and pushing them into cities. This outraged many Native Americans who thought that the government had taken their land and mistreated them. At this time, Alcatraz had been retired and it was not really being used by the government.
Now that Alcatraz was mostly abandoned, this led to the first attempt by Native Americans to seize the island. On March 8, 1964, 5 Sioux Indians landed on Alcatraz with 20-some journalists. They cited the Sioux Treaty of 1868, which gave them the ability to seize federal surplus land. In this case, that was Alcatraz. After landing on the island, they quickly left after being threatened by the warden. Supposedly, the warden said, "These guys are going to get out of here or they're going to get scratched up." The next time the island was occupied was on November 9, 1969. The natives attempted to land during the day again, but they were once again repelled. That night, they returned. 14 natives returned to the island and just hid there. The very next day, they sent out a proclamation. The heart of this proclamation was land reclamation for Native Americans, both because they had existed on the land far before the United States was formed, and because the United States had violated treaties that said the land belonged to the natives. Next morning, the Native Americans presented this declaration to the government. However, they were once again forced to leave the island. The final attempt to occupy the island was made on November 20th, 1969, when 89 men, women, and children landed on the island under the cover of darkness. Unlike the previous attempts to occupy the island, this time there were almost 100 people, and attempting to remove them could lead to violence. For example, according to the History Channel, wary of the fallout that could accompany an attempt to remove the Indians by force, the Nixon administration opted to bide its time and leave the occupiers alone as long as they remained peaceful. At first, the occupation received broad support among the general public. Many celebrities visited the island in support of the cause of the natives. The rock band Creedence Clearwater Revival even gave the Indians a boat. However, as the occupation dragged on, things began to sour. A little girl fell from a prison stairwell to her death, and this brought a lot of bad press. Additionally, many new people traveled to the island because they saw it as a way to live rent-free. They didn't even believe in the Native Americans' cause, they just wanted to live on an island without having to pay rent. Due to this change in the crowd on the island, drugs and alcohol, both originally banned on the island, were soon circulating freely among certain members of the population. As public support died for the occupiers, the government decided it was a good time to finally end the occupation.
The main person in charge was...
Who's kicking who around now?
Who gave the go-ahead for the FBI and other government agencies to raid the Native Americans from the island. When the natives were raided, they arrested 5 women, 4 children, and 6 unarmed men, in total 15 natives. The Native Americans' goal was to awaken the American public to the reality of plight that they faced and the need to assert Indian self-determination. As a result of the occupation, either directly or indirectly, the official government policy of determination of the Indian tribes was ended and the policy of Indian self-determination became the official U.S. government policy.
The occupation of Alcatraz ended in heartbreak and disappointment. However, not all was lost. Although the Nixon administration did not want to be burdened by ongoing protests, it was understood that they needed to maintain diplomatic relations with Native tribes. Vice President Spiro Agnew was reported to be a supporter of Native American rights. 6 years after the occupation, the U.S. Congress passed the 1975 Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, which allowed Native tribes to have more autonomy with their territories. The occupation provided inspiration for other marginalized communities to protest their mistreatment. For example, the Brown Berets of the Chicano rights movement occupied the Catalina Islands off the coast of Los Angeles in 1972, claiming that the islands rightfully belonged to Mexico since the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo did not specify the islands to be given to California. The legacy of the occupation is still being preserved by Native Americans to this day. On every Thanksgiving Day, Native Americans around the country congregate to Alcatraz to celebrate what is known as Un-Thanksgiving Day. The day is meant to celebrate Native culture and heritage. It is also a day of meditation for a group of people who, despite being cast aside to be eradicated, have powered through all opposition. Now the descendants of the survivors are able to celebrate what makes them unique and powerful in a nation that was once their home, but is now unfamiliar territory.